Okay, good evening, everyone. We are going to study for the third installment of our lecture series, Our Holy Land, exploring the spiritual history of our most sacred places in the land of Israel. For this third part, we're going to learn about the city of Bnei Brak. Bnei Brak, I have a fascinating story to tell you. A story that emerges from the sources in our rabbinic tradition, and I believe also the story continues into the 20th century. So we're going to do a little bit of a combination of Torah and of history as we ventured to do last time. I don't know how successful we were, but last time we talked about Hebron, and I felt that although there was the message of hope even within the destruction, the Churban and the Chibur, even within the Churban, it felt a little bit dark. So I felt like we needed to have Bnei Brak story, which is really a fascinating story. You see at the top there. We'll get to him at the end or maybe in the middle, depending on how much time we have. The top is a picture of the Panovich Rav Yosef Shalom Kahanaman, and he is walking over there over the construction site, which becomes the city of the 20th century, the city of Bnei Brak. So you see there's a few acknowledgments here. I always try to give you a little bit of where I've gotten my materials from. I owe a huge debt of gratitude to Rabbi Reuven Brand. Welcome. He had a great shiur that he gave on Bnei Brak, and a lot of the material that I got for, as we'll see, the 20th century rebuilding, the dream to rebuild this picture itself and the title. It comes from Yehuda Geberer, a friend of mine and a historian who is doing amazing work. So let's begin. There's a actual psukim that talk about Bnei Brak in Tanakh. In Yehoshua Perek Yutes, it mentions that in the Nachala, in the portion of the land that was attributed in the Bible, in the Torah, to the Shevet of Dan, it says these are this is the Mate Bnei Dan. And then it lists a few things, and one of the things it lists is Viyuad Uvnei Brak Vegas Rimon. Then in the portion of the land of Dan, which if you look at the map of the 12 tribes of Israel that I have there, you can look at it says Dan, it's near Ephraim, it's near the Mediterranean Sea, the coast over there. That is the portion generally of Dan, and if you look to the right of that, I tried to give you, this is from Google Maps, so I did a screenshot of Google Maps. You could see it's about the area to the left of Petach Tikva, and you could even see the coast over there of the Mediterranean coast. So that you could see to the left of Petach Tikva, a little bit to the north of Ramat Gan, and it's generally in that general vicinity. That's where Bnei Brak is, and it's referenced in a number of places, as we shall soon see. There's a picture here that I included of Bnei Brak in 1928, which is a very, very small settlement that was originally started by a few Hasidic Polish religious settlers. We'll talk a little bit about the story of the formation of modern day Bnei Brak. As you see a picture of it, it's in the cars and the streets, and you can see it's much more urban than it was, and it's huge today compared to what it was in the early 20th century. Bnei Brak is referred to in the Gemara in Ksubis as a land that was a city that was very, very agriculturally fertile. The Gemara says, this is source number 2, it says, Rami bar Yecheskel ikal Bnei Brak. Rami bar Yecheskel happened to travel to Bnei Brak. Chazinu lahanu ize te ka'achlin tuse te'ene v'ka'natef duvsha mete'ene v'chalava toyef minayu mu'ar bahadi hadadi. He saw that the goats were grazing beneath a fig tree. There was honey literally oozing from the figs. Milk was dripping. If you know the land of the pasuk Zavas Chalav Udvash, the Gemara actually quotes that pasuk and says that's what Bnei Brak is. There's Eretz Zavas Chalav Udvash. What does it mean, Zavas Chalav Udvash? To flowing with milk and honey. So usually people think of bee honey, but it's really date honey, because in in the land of Israel, the date tree is what is indigenous to the habitat of the date tree, and when the dates get really ripe, so the juices ooze out of the dates. Does anyone know which particular sage, which particular Talmud Chacham, or we'll see, I'll give you a hint, it's a Tana, is related or associated with the city of Bnei Brak? Rabbi Akiva. Very good, Shlomi. Why is Rabbi Akiva associated with Bnei Brak? The Seder. We're going to get to that. Very good. So we have, in the Haggadah Shel Pesach, we have a reference to Rabbi Akiva holding a Seder in Bnei Brak. So we'll have to get to that soon. Why is Rabbi Akiva so taken up with and associated with the city of Bnei Brak? That is something that we have to figure out. The Gemara in Sanhedrin, Lamed Beis Amud Beis, actually says a number of different rabbis, if you want to get to them, you want to find them, it tells you where to go. And one of the people is mentioned is Rabbi Akiva. If you want to get to Rabbi Akiva, how do you find him? Ach Rabbi Akiva le Bnei Brak. You have to go to Bnei Brak to find Rabbi Akiva. And as Shlomi mentioned in the Haggadah, Magid begins very early into Magid, Maaseh Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Tarfon, Shai Mesubin, Bivnei Brak. And some of the commentaries ask, they're Mesubin, they're literally leaning. The way that we eat the Seder today is probably not what they used to be in the format that they used to have. We try to accomplish the leaning with the pillow, but they used to really, someone was talking about prostration earlier before. They used to lie down on these low, couches.
Like the Caesar.
Yeah, like royalty. They used to sit on the floor. So what the Mefarshim ask, how could it be that Rabbi Akiva, who's in the presence of his teachers, as we'll soon see, he studied from Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yeshua, how could he be prostrating himself? It wouldn't be respectful because Rabbi Akiva was a student of Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Eliezer. So how could it be? So many point out that it was his home because he was there. And if it's your home, if you're the Baal Bayis, then it's not considered disrespectful in your own home because that's the way you comport yourself at your Seder. So this was Rabbi Akiva's home. He was in Bnei Brak. Now, why were the sages, why were the Chachamim in Bnei Brak to begin with? Interestingly enough, I'm just going to close this first because I hear some talking in the background.
But it says Rabbi Tarfon was also Mesubin.
They were all Mesubin, but the question is, Rabbi Akiva was in the presence of his Rabbeim. So how could he be doing that? So some explain that it's because it was his home. But you'll see other sources that say, the Aruch HaShulchan says it in his parish on the Haggadah that he says it was Rabbi Akiva's house. We'll get to that soon. But why were they there? And also, just a little bit about Rabbi Akiva himself it will help us to understand, why they were there. So, I mean, to make the question a little bit stronger, I know it's not Pesach time, but usually you are home for your Seder. Like what they didn't have matzah. Rabbi Tarfon was short on paper goods. Like, well, why were they with Rabbi Akiva, right? So that's a question that I'd like to answer. But to understand it, we have to understand a little bit about what Rabbi Akiva, his story was, and what does he represent. So we know Rabbi Akiva doesn't grow up with the strongest background and education. But more than that, we know, the Gemara even says in Pesachim Mem Tesam Beis that he was an Am Haaretz. He was an ignoramus. And he says about himself that when I was in Am Haaretz, I wasn't just someone who didn't know anything. I hated rabbis. I hated them. He says, he said, when I was in Am Haaretz, he used to say, Mi tein li talmid chacham. He says, who's going to give me a rabbi? Get me a rabbi. Because if you get me a rabbi, va'anachsheno kachamor, then I will bite him like a donkey. So this is like much later. Obviously, Rabbi Akiva goes through his transition and becomes this great sage. And the students ask him, Rebbe, Amar Kekelev, why don't you say, you bite him like a donkey? Bite him like a dog. That's what usually, right? So he says, no. Amr lahen, he says to the students, Ze noshech v'shover etzem. When a donkey bites, it breaks the bones. When a dog bites, it's neshech v'in shover etzem. It doesn't break bones. I wanted to break those rabbis' bones. Whoa. Pretty wild, right? So Rabbi Akiva really, he had this hatred. Where did this hatred come from? And how did he become this great Talmid Chacham himself? And what is his message to the students? Yeah, guys, when I was, it doesn't say, I played ball, I also went to the movies. No, he says, when I saw the rabbis, I wanted to break their bones. What's his message? What's his lesson here? What are we supposed to learn from this? So to understand this, I think we have to look at the story of Rabbi Akiva, which is in many ways, I guess, enmeshed with the story of Bnei Brak. The story is pretty well known. Some of us probably know parts of it, but one of the collections of this story is in the Medrash in Avos de Rabbi Nassin, Os Vav. And the Medrash asks, Ma haya tichilasos Rabbi Akiva? What was the origin story of Rabbi Akiva? Amru ben Arba'im Shana. It was said that he was 40 years old. Ben Arba'im Shana haya. V'lo Shana klum. He didn't know anything. Pam achas haya omed al pi ha'be'er. One time he was standing at the mouth of a well. Amar, he said, Micha kak even zo. Who carved out the hole in the stone? He saw a well had water dripping on a stone, and it was because of the process of erosion. He saw there was a hole in the stone, and he said, "Who made this hole?" I guess it's more of a rhetorical question, but apparently there were people near him, and they said, "Amru." They said, "It's from the water." Lo amayim shetadu noflin aleh b'chol yom. Is it not from the water which constantly falls from it? On top of it all day long. So they quote a pasuk. Fine. Miyad chaya Rabbi Akiva dan kal v'chomer ba'atzmo. He made a kal v'chomer. A kal v'chomer is a logical inference. It's referred to in Latin as an a fortiori, which is sort of like the kal is the light and the chomer is the heavy, right? So if I could lift 100 pounds on the bench press, I'd be lucky if I could still do that. I don't know if I could. That's the that's sort of the chomer. Then certainly the light one, then the kal, which is fit. Let's say I could certainly bench press 50 pounds. So he made a kal v'chomer within himself. Marach pisal asakoshe. If something that's very soft could make a hole in what's hard, in other words, the water can make a hole in the stone. Divrei Torah shekoshe kebarzel al achas kama v'kama sheichakaku as libi shu basar v'dam. Torah, which is as hard as iron, could certainly pierce my heart, which is soft. What does that mean? We'll have to get to that in a second. And then miyad chazer lilmod Torah. He immediately went to learn Torah. And then he went halach. He went to the school teachers. He actually goes to his son. It says he goes with his son, and he sits next to him with his peers, and the malamdei tinokos, the chida rebbeim, is probably the child's worst nightmare. My dad is coming to kindergarten with me. Oh my gosh. I make that joke with my kids sometimes. I say, can I go into your class? No. So that's probably really not a good idea from a parental role, sort of social experience. I don't know the son of Rabbi Akiva, what happened to him. But he goes to the class and he learns and he learns Aleph Beis. And he goes so far and he studies and he masters all of Torah until the point where Shalom at Kol HaTorah Kula Halach v'yoshav lefnei Rabbi Eliezer v'lefnei Rabbi Yoshua. Remember we said them? He goes in front of Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yoshua, who are often the interlocutors. They're often arguing with each other. And he goes and he studies from them and he says, teach me Mishnah. And eventually it's a whole process and they teach it to him and one thing led to the next. And he astounds them to the point where eventually he learns all of the Chumash, then he learns the Mishnah, and then he silences them. They're so impressed with his knowledge, and that is sort of the shorthand story of Rabbi Akiva. So let's go back to the sort of the Avos Rabbi Nassin is trying to make a point here. What's the origin story? He saw water making a hole on a rock, and he said, if Torah, which is iron. If a soft thing can make a hole in a rock, then Torah, which is iron, can certainly pierce my heart. Doesn't really make any sense. What's the chomer? What's the kal? If water, which is soft, can make a hole in a rock, so then what? Iron is really hard. Torah is very hard, and my heart is soft. It doesn't seem to follow. So this is a difficult passage, but I would quote from you from Rabbi Reuven Brand, who I mentioned before. He suggested something which I thought opened up the entire picture of Rabbi Akiva. We said before that Rabbi Akiva hated these rabbis, right? Because what did Rabbi Akiva need? Rabbi Akiva needed a different approach to Torah. He was given a fire and brimstone, an iron, divrei Torah being like iron. That didn't pierce his heart. It didn't work. He didn't get inspired. He hated rabbis. Why would he hate rabbis so much? If he didn't know anything, he would just be impartial or, pariv. But he had this hatred because it wasn't working. And he had this soft heart. And that's why the Torah was not penetrating, because it was so hard and so fierce and so coarse. He needed an approach that was sweet, that was soft. And he said, wow, water, which is rach, water which is soft, eventually could break down the hard heart. And that was Rabbi Brand suggests is what Rabbi Akiva started to learn from this water. The consistent, soft, gentle, optimistic, if I dare say, approach to Torah. And that is what he's able to then silence. It says he silences Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Eliezer. Those were in the Gemara, in the sort of the image of the rabbi, they were the more harsh and Rabbi Eliezer for sure. But we won't get into the whole story of Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Eliezer. But there was definitely a feeling that he had that there was a harshness, there was a fire and brimstone approach, and he needed that soft water approach. And who does he go to study with? Who does he go to learn this approach of water? Fascinating. Rabbi Akiva learns from a very famous person that my son taught me a joke about it. It's a childhood joke, but maybe you'll find it amusing. Nachum Ish Gamzu. He studies by Nachum Ish Gamzu. Who is Nachum Ish Gamzu? He's the one who says, Gamzu Latova. So my son told me, what do you say if you sit on gum? Gamzu Latova. That's my 5-year-old son. And now he's 6. But it's not bad, right? Now he's actually 7. But he just turned 7. So he told me that joke a few years ago. So Nachum Ish Gamzu said always Gamzu Latova. Terrible things happen to him. This too for the good. And we know there's a story. The Gemara in Chagiga tells us that he studied by Nachum Ish Gamzu. It's not just, I just make it up. Chagiga Yud Beis, source number 7. And he himself, he internalizes this idea that everything is for the best, which is an optimistic, positive, soft, maybe we could say, approach. And he tells us in Gemara and Brachos, Daf Samach Amud Beis, that he used to say, Rabbi Akiva used to say, Kol da'av rachmana l'tav. Everything that God does is for the best. And the Gemara tells us, Ki had Rabbi Akiva dahavi ka'azav ba'orcha. Rabbi Akiva once was walking on the way. Matalahi masa. He came to a certain city. B'haush piza lo yavile. And they wouldn't even let him stay there. There was no place to stay. So what did he say to himself? Amr kol da'av rachmana l'tav. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't have a place to sleep tonight, but it's all for the best. So he goes to sleep in the forest, in the field. And he had with him a rooster, the chamara, and a donkey, ushraga, and a candle, a torch. Asa zika kavel shraga. A wind comes, blows out the candle. So he's in the forest, in the dark, with a rooster and with a donkey. Asa shunra achli l'tarnagola. And comes along a cat, and eats his rooster. Asa Arya hears the lion. Comes the lion, achle l'chamara. It eats the donkey. So what does Rabbi Akiva say? Kol da'av rachmana l'tav. Everything is for the best. Internalizing the message of his Rebbe, Nachum Ish Gamzu. Ba b'leil ya'asa gayasa. That night there was an army that was coming through, and oftentimes when an army came through, they pillaged and they did terrible things. So what happened was that they came Shavya Lamasa. The army came and took the city captive. Amr Lahu, Rabbi Akiva was out there in the midbar, and he said, Lav Amri Lachu, Kol Ma'asha Osa, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hakol Latova. He says, I see that because had the rooster been around, it would have alerted the army. Had the donkey been there, it would have made noise. If the light was there, they would have seen me. If I was staying in the city, I would have been captive by this army. The fact that I was denied a place and I was totally alone in the dark with nothing was the tav of it. And perhaps the most optimistic story of all of Rabbi Akiva is the end of the Gemara in Makos, where the Chachamim were walking and they saw a fox come out of the place of the Makam HaMikdash, and they started to cry, and literally the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Gemara in Makos tells us, in the source number 9, Makos Chav Dalet Mabez, and the rabbis start to cry. And what does Rabbi Akiva start to do? He starts to laugh. And they say, hold on, why are you laughing? He says, why are you crying? They said, look at this. A place where a non-Kohen would go, he is supposed to be put to death. And now there's a fox going there. We're not going to cry. So Rabbi Akiva says, for this reason, I'm laughing. Because he says, if I see the destruction, the prophecies came true of destruction. He quotes psukim that show us that there's a prophecy of destruction and they're connected. Just summarizing the Gemara, it's connected to the prophecies of redemption. If I see the destruction is happening, now I know for sure that the redemption will happen. And they say, Akiva nechamtanu, Akiva nechamtanu. Akiva, you have comforted us. Akiva, you have comforted us. So Rabbi Akiva starts off his life with this hatred of rabbis because it was shoved down his throat. Maybe call this editorializing a little bit, but to add a little flavor to it, he had this hatred because it didn't work for him. He didn't get that warmth and that embrace and that positivity and that optimism. It was like an iron, but he needed that approach of like water, of flowing, of soft, of optimism, and he found that when he saw the water. But then he had to find his Rebbe, learn himself, and he found Nachum Ishkamzu. He internalized this message of optimism that everything is for the best, and ultimately he's able to have this perspective that gave comfort to the other rabbis that even in the destruction, even in the worst possible churban that we see in front of us, the fox coming out of the Kodesh HaKadoshim, he's able to look ahead and see that there is a not only a silver lining, but there's a promise of redemption, and he's able to focus on that optimism. So going back to our original question, why were there all these rabbis Seder night in Rabbi Akiva's house? Did they not have enough wine and they didn't have enough matzah? Like, what was going on? So perhaps there was an answer that's suggested and quoted in Rabbi Jonathan Sachs's Haggadah, where Rabbi Akiva was one of the believers in Bar Kochba, and he quotes from the historian Cecil Roth that perhaps they were in this home because the dates sort of line up, that this was the time where Bar Kochba led this rebellion, and Rabbi Akiva believed maybe he was a Mashiach, and maybe they were in Rabbi Akiva's house because Rabbi Akiva believed in Bar Kochba, and they were gathering to plan this revolt. But Rabbi Sachs says there was no indication from the text, and he doesn't really think this makes a lot of sense, and therefore he thinks that Cecil Roth is incorrect. So why were they there? So I want to share with you an approach from Rav Yechiel Michal Epstein, the Aruch HaShulchan in his Haggadah Shel Pesach, Leil Shimurim. The Aruch HaShulchan says exactly what we said before. Rabbi Akiva was the ultimate optimist. Rabbi Akiva knew how to look at a situation and say, this is the reason why I'm laughing. I could see there's a positive way to look at this. Kol davar Rahman al-Tav. Everything's good. So after the destruction, after the quashing of the Bar Kokhba rebellion, after Churban Habayis, Rabbi Akiva was the home that they chose to go in. Why on Pesach? Because Pesach is so painful. You have a Seder after you knew what it was like to have the Karban Pesach, to go up to the Makam HaMikdash. That's what Pesach is. Now we're sitting here, without a Mikdash. This is not a Pesach. This is not Geula. This is not going from Avdus to Cherus. This is painful. So how could we have a Seder? They had to go to Rabbi Akiva. They had to go to the ultimate optimist. This is where Aruch HaShulchan says.
This is the first Seder after Korban.
So I don't know historically. He doesn't really go that far. I saw. I think it's Rabbanit Shani Tarragon had an article about this in HaMizrachi. I was Googling around. I think she says that this was during, most probably after the Churban second Beis HaMikdash, after the harsh Hadrianic persecutions, after the Bar Kokhba rebellion. It was a really low time in Jewish history. I didn't see this exactly in the Aruch HaShulchan, but he does say that they went, he was the one, Rabbi Akiva was, Chazka betikvas klal Yisrael. Tikif achar churban. He had this hopeful perspective immediately after the Churban.
When was he killed? He was one of the
He was one of the ceremonies. Yeah.
So what, he was killed like a few months later?
I don't know the whole the history.
The
Asari Harugim Malchus.
destruction?
They happen over a period of time. They're not all.
Right.
That's an interesting. I'm not sure the history of it, but they put it all together.
So some of the 10 may have been killed already.
Seems like
and
that.
his number was coming up, but maybe he was
I don't
killed
know.
A few months later.
Yeah, so I don't know.
Later.
I don't know when. Yeah, I don't know
It
the
wasn't
history.
long after this.
Could be it wasn't. It could be it wasn't.
Yeah.
And what does he say, by the way? I didn't have it on the source sheet, but Rabbi Akiva says they were literally, taking the skin off of his face, I think, and he says, "All my life, I've been waiting to say Shema Yisrael and really say B'chol Nafshecha with all my." That's Rabbi Akiva's perspective. He's able to look at this optimistic perspective, and that's what Aruch HaShulchan says that they came Bo Kulam Leiro Ulebeso Rabbi Akiva. That's what I was saying, that it's in his house. Maybe you don't accept the whole Haseba theory, but it's in his house, he says, and that's and they came to him to give them chizik, to give them strength, how they could possibly have a Pesach Seder without the Beis HaMikdash. Okay. One last Gemara. There's a fascinating Gemara in Gittin. The Gemara in Gittin says, Bnei banav shel Haman. It's a Gemara in Gittin, Daf Nun Zayin Beis. From the children of Haman, the descendants of Haman, limdu Torah b'Bnei Brak. They study Torah in Bnei Brak. So let's go back to our original question. What does Bnei Brak have to do with Rabbi Akiva? And how could it be Amalek? Haman is not just an enemy. He is the enemy. He emerges from Amalek. How could it be that the children of Haman are studying Torah in Bnei Brak? Perhaps, I don't have a proof to this, but perhaps the name Bnei Brak could give us a little bit of a hint. This is my own theory. I don't know if it's true, but Bnei is the children. So we saw the Bnei Banav Shel Haman, the children of the children. So Bnei Brak. Brak could be Berek, with the empty ones. The children of the empty ones could also come to something. There could be hope even for the children of Haman. That's Rabbi Akiva. That's Bnei Brak. There could be such evil in the world. There could be such darkness. But we could see that they could come to learning Torah. That even Amalek could do tshuva. Even the children of Amalek could do tshuva. Incredible. Incredible. Where did I come up with this? So first of all, Rabbi Brand was tremendously helpful, but I was thinking about this when I looked at the story of the modern day rebirth of Torah in the 20th century in the land of Israel. And Bnei Brak is one of the first places it begins. Let's tell you the story, with the time allotted, of the rebuilding of the city of Bnei Brak in the 20th century. So to understand this, we have to go back to Rav Yosef Shlomo Kahaneman. Rav Yosef Shlomo Kahaneman, born in 1886. That's the top title of the front page, A Dream to Rebuild. And he is known as the Panovich Rav. The Panovich Rav, Panovich was a city in Lithuania. And the Panovich Rav was arguably one of the greatest builders of Torah after the Holocaust, and maybe arguably of the entire 20th century. And I want to show you a real person who lived, who changed the face of the Torah world. He was a very natural leader. He was an incredible fundraiser, perhaps the greatest. And his first stint at fundraising was when he was a bacher at the yeshiva in Telz in Lithuania. What happened was very interesting. We've spoken about this way back, maybe like 4 or 5 years ago. Maybe Murray and Jerry will remember this. But we gave a lecture series, I think it was even on Zoom, where we still were in COVID. I spoke about the Musar movement and the anti-Musar camps. And in the Telz yeshiva, there was an anti-Musar group, which, without getting into all the details, they didn't want the Musar people to take over the yeshiva, and they broke away from the yeshiva. There was a revolt in the yeshiva of Telz, and they actually closed down the yeshiva for a period of time. And who led the anti-Musar camp? The Panovich Rav, or at the time he was known as, he was born in the Lithuanian city of Kuli, and they called him Yosha, because Yosef is often Yosha, like Rav Yosha Ber, Rav Yosef Dov Soloveitchik. So Yosha Kuler, the Yosha from Kuli. And he led the revolt. And he became, as a bacher, as a student, they took the yeshiva and they went to, they actually went to a different location to hold this rebel yeshiva, to hold starim, to learn, and to have this anti-Musar yeshiva. And who was the Rosh Yeshiva? Who was the head? Yasha Kuli, the cooler, the Yosef Shlomo. I keep getting mixed up. Shlomo or Shalom? Shlomo. Yosef Shlomo Kahanaman. And Rabbi Lesher Gordon, who was the Rosh Yeshiva, the real Rosh Yeshiva of the, he obviously was really pained by this whole situation, and the yeshiva broke, and they broke apart, and this whole thing. So it was really, really painful for him. And as you could expect, there were all these boys who left the yeshiva, and they didn't have any money. So he was trying to support these guys, I guess maybe to give them lunch or something, or food or something like that. So they had no money, and it wasn't really working so well. So the Panovich Rav, or young Yosef Shlomo, goes to Rav Lesher Gordon, and he says to him...
In Lithuania or in Israel?
In Lithuania. This is all happening in the late 19th century. He goes to Rav Lesher Gordon, the one who he insulted and broke away, and he says, listen, your students are starving, and they're learning Torah. You're not going to feed them? You're not going to give us money? And Rav Lesher Gordon gave them money. So that was his first stint at fundraising, back when he was raising money from the Rosh Yeshiva, who was I think that says a lot about Rav Lesher Gordon, who loved his Talmidim, he loved his students, and he valued Torah so much that even the ones who broke away, it ended up fizzling out and not working out anyways. But he still gave them support, even when they caused him so much heartache. An interesting quirk of history, Rav Yosef Shlomo Kahanaman, he banded together with the maskilim of the yeshiva, who were sort of the more intellectual, open-minded, and they banded together to create this breakaway. The leader of that group, of the maskilim, was a fellow by the name of Avraham Hertzfeld. Avraham Hertzfeld ends up, as we'll see later, ends up being key to the Panovich Rav's success at getting lots of land and permits and all the tax papers, because Avraham Hertzfeld ends up being a political leader in Mapai in Israel in the 1950s and 60s. Okay. Just a little bit of his pre-war bio. The Panovich Rav, as he's known as, it was the Rav in Panovich, after Rav Yitzchak Yaakov Rabinovich passes away in 1919. And even then, he was raising money and fundraising and building. He built 3 yeshivas, a school, and an orphanage in the city of Lithuania. And in fact, he was a great speaker, even at this young age, as this rabbi and Rosh Yeshiva and fundraiser. And he was elected to Lithuanian parliament. He was actually a political... he had a political position, and he was a member of the autonomous National Council of Lithuanian Jewry, and an active member of the leader of Agudas Yisrael. But, as we know, the terrible story of the Shoah, everything was destroyed. Literally, all the yeshivas razed to the ground. His whole family was murdered. His whole town was murdered. There was one son. He and his son were off on a fundraising trip. His son Avram, and they were the only survivors. They,
Were they America or somewhere else?
I think they may have been in Western Europe. I don't know. I'm not sure where they were.
That's why they survived.
They survived.
Because they were on a fundraiser.
I'm sorry. I have in my notes too. They were in the United States. They survived because they were not there at the time, and the entire city was destroyed, and that left a deep, deep impression on the Panovich Rav. I mean, it left a deep impression on everybody. But for him, he was energized and completely devoted to rebuilding memorials, to rebuilding yeshivas, to rebuilding what was lost. And I'll show you, it animated everything that he did, in every speech, he actually made a documentary film about the Panovich Yeshiva, as we'll see. He calls it the Panovich Yeshiva. He has his whole vision, as we'll soon see. His vision was to rebuild. And to rebuild, not like, okay, we will one day. Right away, 1942. In 1942, there was something called the Second Battle of El Alamein. Does anyone know what the Battle of El Alamein was? The Battle of El Alamein, you have some pictures there in your source sheet, was when in northern Africa, the Allied forces fought the Axis, and it was, I believe Montgomery was on the British side, and they were battling against the legendary Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, and between October 23rd and November 11th, this was not a clear battle who would win, and they got within approximately 330 kilometers from the Suez Canal, which if you look at your map, you can see is very, very close to Palestine. And it was people in the land of Israel. This is where he ended up. The Panovich Rav made his way from the United States to eventually get to the land of, that was called Palestine at the time. And he says, we're building Yeshivas Panovich. And they said, do you know Rommel is around the corner? We are in existential danger. And you want to build a yeshiva? You're crazy. You're crazy. You're dreaming. And he didn't just want to build a yeshiva. He said, I'm going to build a building that'll fit 400 students. They said to him, are you nuts? Number one, you're not going to build a yeshiva. Number two, there aren't, this gives you a picture of 1942 in the land of Israel, there aren't 400 students that will learn in yeshiva. You're nuts, you're crazy. And this became his big saying. They told him, you're dreaming. He says, I am dreaming. But I'll tell you the Yiddish, maybe I'll butcher it, but I'll try to say it. He says, Ich chalamt, aber ich schluf nicht. I am dreaming, but I'm not asleep. So way before Martin Luther King, the Rav Yosef Shlomo Kahaneman, the Panovich Rav, he said, I have a dream. I have a dream. A different kind of dream, but a dream nonetheless. And he builds out on a hill of Bnei Brak. Bnei Brak had 3 hills, still till this day, it's surrounded by 3 hills. There were 3 hills. He said, one hill is going to be for Panovich Yeshiva. The other hill is going to be for Slobodka, which was the other Musar Lithuanian yeshiva, and the other hill is going to be for Telz. He would incorporate Kelm, which was another yeshiva in Lithuania, into his own yeshiva. That's why he always hired the mashkichim, the spiritual mentors of his yeshiva from the Masorah, from the tradition of Kelm. He hired Rav Eliyahu Dessler. He hired Rav Chaskel Levenstein. He tried to get Rav Eli Lapian. He tried to incorporate Kelm into his yeshiva, even though, interestingly enough, he was anti-Musar, as we remember that story before, but he felt, again, to rebuild what was lost and to incorporate that yeshiva of Kelm, which was so important in the Lithuanian yeshiva world. He was able to convince Slobodka to come to Bnei Brak. Rav Isaac Sher founds a yeshiva in Slobodka. It's still there to today in Bnei Brak. Telz moves to Cleveland, Ohio in the United States, and they don't want to come to Bnei Brak, so he doesn't get them. He then turns to the Mir, which is another yeshiva in Lithuania that was destroyed, and the Mir decides that they want to build in Yerushalayim. But even though he was Lithuanian, he says, I want to rebuild the world that was lost, and he goes to the Imre Chaim of Vizhnitz, and he has them build the Chatzir, the court of Vizhnitz, which is still there today. You can see a picture of the incredibly vast, grand interior base medrash of Vizhnitz. You can see there's 3 Ezras Nashim, 3 3 lady sections. That's what it looks like today.
I've been there.
You've been in there.
My dad has a
Visions.
plaque- my
They
dad
have
has
a hotel there,
my dad has
right?
a plaque there.
Your dad has a plaque there, really?
My grandparents are buried there.
Really? Wow.
Divisions.
Um,
So what year divisions come there, you said?
so they come in the 40s. I don't know exactly when they
because of
build. I don't know when they start building.
Because Tells left?
Tells never got there. Tells
Oh.
went to Cleveland, so they
Never
didn't.
got there.
They didn't get there. And he was incredible. He was the people's person. He was energetic. He would not stop. You saw the picture in the front. He's like walking on that construction. My mind to see this incredible human being, and people were astounded. How did he get all these connections? And how did he get the land? And how did he get all the government bureaucracy? I mean, think about it. It's not even, there's no state. Like, this is pre-state. And he gets all these papers, and he gets all the yeshiva built. And in many ways, due to his friendship with Avraham Herzfeld, who was this secular, anti-religious, Mapai political leader, but it was his old friend from Telz Yeshiva. And first of all, just amazing that this personal relationship transcended all these ideological differences. Fascinating, Herzfeld, not only during the lifetime of the Panovich Rav, but even afterwards, he led a committee of a fundraising campaign for alumni of Panovich Yeshiva. He really felt the cause and was totally committed. Now, I want to discuss.
Rav Shach, or Rav Shach came after he died?
He hires Rav Shach later. Yes.
As a young guy.
He was younger. Yes. Interestingly, as I mentioned, he was this amazing fundraiser. He spends very little time in the yeshiva. He's always on the move. He's in South Africa. He's in the United States. Very rarely is even in the yeshiva. I want to just touch on a little bit of his unique perspective. He flew the Israeli flag on Yom HaAtzmaut. You can see a picture. They still do it till today. And he had a very interesting approach. He comes from a certain Lithuanian, I would say a little bit of a moderate approach, even though he's in the Haredi, we call it the Haredi world, but he comes from that Lithuanian school, which was, I wouldn't say completely Zionistic, but if you understand, he comes from a world of a little bit more, I would say, of a moderate approach. And I'll share a few interesting stories. First of all, he was always making jokes, non-confrontational, always trying to share his communications in a certain humorous way. So the people were saying, how could you fly the Israeli flag? It's a secular thing. And he joked that in the Panovich Yeshiva in Lithuania, this, I was a Lithuanian patriot. I flew the flag on Independence Day. So here's no worse. Why should I not fly the flag? Which, it says a lot about his approach. He wasn't like, he wasn't saying necessarily that this is a religious thing, but he was saying like we should fly the flag. Another interesting story was apparently he did not say Tachanun on Yom HaAtzmaut, but he did not say Hallel. So people question this. I believe Rabbi Beryl Wine talks about this. I found an article which quotes this, and I believe that when I was in high school, I have to really do a little bit more research on this, but I remember that Rabbi Lazar Meir Teitz, who was the Rosh Hashiva of my yeshiva high school in JEC in Elizabeth, every year on Yom HaAtzmaut, we didn't say Hallel, but he was definitely not an Agudist. I don't think he was a Mizrahi, but he would quote, I believe, from the Panovich Rav, the following, I would say it's a joke, but it's an interesting perspective. He says, in the Panovich Yeshiva, we do as Ben Gurion. We do Minug Ben Gurion. Ben Gurion doesn't say Hallel. Ben Gurion doesn't say Tachnun. So we don't say Hallel. We don't say Tachnun. So it's sort of like tongue in cheek a little bit, like he's of course he should be, but at the same time it's sort of this. He wants to be. He doesn't want to be confrontational. He wants to be accepted by everybody, and he tries to bring people together. And that was really an incredible ability he had. His relationship with Zionist leaders, political leaders at the time, was not limited to his old friend Avram Herzfeld from Telz. Let's take a step back for a second. We had 1942, and then we'll get back to that relationship. In 1942, he wants to start the yeshiva, but there's no yeshiva. He wants to start, so the yeshiva is housed in a beis medrash which still exists today, called the Heligman Beis Medrash, and it is on Rehov Rabbi Akiva. And there was really no inaugural event. He told people later, it was just him and the Chazon Ish. The Chazon Ish, I mentioned before that the city of Bnei Brak was founded in the 1920s by a group of small Polish Hasidish pioneers, but the Chazon Ish was also someone who was there since the 1930s. It was him and the Chazon Ish and a few Bachrim. And he says, we didn't drink l'chaim, we drank tears. It was sad. There was no, they said Kapitel of Tehillim, and they put the cement in the dirt. Only in 1953 did they have this incredible inaugurational ceremony, the Chanukas Habayis, when they actually built the yeshiva. And in this dedication ceremony, there were a number of people that were on the invitation list, which caused somewhat of a stir in his circles. So, first of all, I mentioned that he wasn't right. His relationship was not limited to his old friend from Telz, Avram Herzfeld. He was interested in bridging a lot of these bridging the two communities, maybe more than two. The second president of the state of Israel, Yitzchak ben Tzvi, was invited. The chief rabbi of the state of Israel, Rav Yitzchak Isaac Halevi Herzog, was also invited. I believe at that time he was not yet chief rabbi, but he was the chief rabbi in Tel Aviv. Actually, no, in 1953 he would have already been the chief rabbi. Rav Unterman, the future chief rabbi. That I think was the rabbi of Tel Aviv, the chief rabbi of Tel Aviv. And Yitzchak Kister, who was a religious member of the Supreme Court, was the MC. And some people, what are you associating with this, the Zionist parties and all these things? And he said no. And they flew the Israeli flag, and Yosef Berg and Chaim Moshe Shapiro attended. And the Panovich Rav spoke in Hebrew, in modern Hebrew, for the first time, publicly. And there were Hasidish Rebbes, the Mozhitzer Rebbe was there, the Sadigera Rebbe was there, and they started writing these letters against the Panovich Rav, these Pachkevilim, these anti-protests. He didn't care about that. He had this vision, this dream, and he was going to accomplish it, and he did. He built basically the entire city of Bnei Brak. I mean, he had an incredible vision. He not only built a yeshiva, he built orphanages. There's a picture here. It's called the Beit Avot. He called it the Beit Avot. And he was very connected to many different events. You can see there's a picture there on Asara B'Teves, 1945, in Tel Aviv, in central Tel Aviv. He was asked to make some sort of hesped for the 6 million Kedoshim who perished, and he was chosen by the mayor of Tel Aviv, Israel Rokeach, to give the hesped. He had a vision of something called the Ohel Kedoshim. Ohel Kedoshim. There's a building on the other side, across the street from it's on this. We said it perched on this hill. On the other side of the street, there's the Ohel Kedoshim. What was the Ohel Kedoshim? He had this vision that there would be a memorial built across the street from the yeshiva. It would have Yizkor books from every community that was destroyed. They would learn Mishnayos on the yard sites of the community. They would designate a day. They would say Kaddish. They would have 700 seats. There would be a museum with artifacts. They would have.
It's almost like Yad Vashem.
He was inspired. That is exactly what it was.
Yad Vashem was already
Yad
around.
Vashem.
What year was this? 53.
This was in 1953, and it was
built
built in 1960. But he was inspired by the Ohel Yizkar of Yad Vashem, the Ohel Yizkar, and he built an Ohel Kedoshim, and he envisioned this sort of memorial to all the communities, and he wanted to build 18 different yeshivas of all the different yeshivas that were destroyed. His projects never ended, and the living projects like the orphanages and the yeshivas and the different institutions, organizations, and social institutions always took precedent over the memorials of the people who were no longer. So this vision never came to fruition of the Ohel Kedoshim, but just to give you a sense of his vision. He had 2 psukim that were emblazoned onto the buildings of both the Ohel Kedoshim and the yeshiva itself. The 2 psukim were, one was Uvahar Tzion Tia Pleita, that on Har Tzion, on the temple, on Zion's mount, will the remnants survive. That's a reference again to the remnants, the survivors of the Shoah. And he said, that would be the place, it would be in Har Zion, and the land of Israel would be the place of the rebuilding. And then he also had another pasuk, V'haya hanishar b'tzion v'hanoser b'Yerushalayim kadosh yomer lo. He says that the remnants of Zion will be left in Yerushalayim and will all be holy. And legend has it, can't prove this, but legend has it that he heard from the Chafetz Chaim that in a prophetic prediction, and he quoted these psukim, that the land of Israel would be the place of the remnants of the survivors, and the place where it would be an upcoming war and there would be destruction, and that would be the place of Israel. The land of Israel would be the place where the Torah world would be rebuilt. I'll tell you a few fascinating stories. Both of these stories I wrote in the bulletin over the last few years. But at the first inauguration of the Panovich Yeshiva, which was just a handful of people, apparently the Panovich Rav said that the real inauguration of the Panovich Yeshiva, he says, happened years before. Let's just get to the story here. It happened in Lithuania. Let me see if I can find it here.
His mother?
Yes. If I can find it. Oh, here it is. He says it happened. He says it happened many, many years before. In 1943 was when they had that ceremony. I don't see when it was, but it was sometime, when he was a small child. And he said, when did the yeshiva become? What was the story of the inauguration? He says that it was snowing one night, and it was. He said 57 years ago. There it is, 57 years ago. So it was when he was a small child, and he said it was snowing one night, and the children who went to Cheder, they were eating dinner, and they were talking about how, each one had a reason why they wanted to go to yeshiva. One child wanted to go because the next day, because there was a special test, and they were excited. And another child had a siyum, and they only had one pair of boots and one coat. And all the boys said, "Who's going to get the coat? Who's going to get the boots to be able to walk through the snow?" And it was a whole. They were, they really, each of them wanted it, and they couldn't decide. So they said they're going to do a lottery, and they did this lottery. And to make a long story short, the mother in the morning wakes up early, and she wakes up to one of the older boys, and he says, "What? I won the lottery!" And she says, "Come with me," and she basically carries him on her back. She wore the boots, and she carries him to the yeshiva early in the morning. And then she comes back to the house and wakes up the next boy and says, "What? I won the lottery!" And she brings the boy. And then finally, the third one, which is the youngest one, was little Yosef Shlomo, and he says, I guess he says to his mother, like, "I see how much you gave to us, and to make sure that we got to learn every single day." He says, "I'll give you a bracha that there will be, many students, that I will carry many students, so to speak. I will carry many students in the Beis Medrash." And he says that moment where my mother, she walked back and forth, for hours to bring her children to the cheder, even in the snow, with that one pair of boots. That's when the Panovich Yeshiva began. That's a story about his mother. Another story. Was during his fundraising trips. That's how he got to know Rabbi Beryl Wine. He used to go to Miami, and he got very close with a particular donor. And he was an elderly man who had a lot of savings, but for whatever reason, I think he invested money and he had a certain retirement plan, and he basically had this large mansion. But he ran out of savings, and he couldn't get a mortgage on his house because he was in his 80s. And at that time, he couldn't get a mortgage on his house, and so he had this big, massive mansion, but he didn't have any money. He literally couldn't put bread on the table. So at that time, he was close with Rabbi Wein. At that time, the Panovich Rav says to Rabbi Wein, let's go to so and so. He says, no, he's just gonna be embarrassed. He's not in a place to give. He says, no, we want to visit. I want to visit so and so. So they go and they, he sensitively talks to them about the fact that he's been giving to the yeshiva so much, and the man shares with him the situation, and he basically says, like, how much do you need? What type of, what's your budget? Like, what do you need? And eventually, the man tells him, and he says, okay, the yeshiva, you supported the yeshiva for all these years, we're going to send you a check for this amount of money that you need. And the man said, no. He says, no, I insist. The Panovich Rav said, we're sending you a check. And he left, and apparently he told Rabbi Wein that sometimes the yeshiva also has to do chesed. It's not just about learning Torah. And for many years, this man lived well late into his 90s. For many, many years, he received a monthly check from the yeshiva, and apparently after he passed away, he didn't have children, he didn't have relatives. He gave the house to the yeshiva. But that was the Panovich Rav. He was an incredible human being. And what I thought about was when I learned about his story, that he rebuilt an entire city. And the city of Bnei Brak is really, in many ways, could be attributed to his vision. I thought of the fact that it's happening in Bnei Brak can't be a coincidence. And maybe in some way, the Panovich Rav was like the 20th century Rabbi Akiva. He was the one who saw destruction, who had every reason to give up. His entire family was murdered. His entire city was destroyed. And he could have just wallowed in pain, and that would have been, I don't want to say wallowed, I want to say the normal reaction. That would have been the normal reaction to anyone who goes through such a trauma. And the Panovich Rav was somehow able to channel this approach of Rabbi Akiva in Bnei Brak, in the city that we said was the Bnei Berek, that the children of even Haman, of the rake, of the empty, is able to find the goodness. And the Rabbi Akiva, who was able to find that soft approach, that optimism, that positivity, the Nachem Ishkamzu, it can't be by accident that this all happened in Bnei Brak. And in many ways, I think that incredibly the story fits with what Chazal tell us. It fits with the story of the Panovich Rav, and it's the person, the Rabbi Akiva, who saw the fox coming out of the ruins of the Kodesh HaKadoshim, able to say, now I know the redemption will come. And the Panovich Rav had somehow, I don't know if they're related, I don't know anything about the genealogy, but in some way he's able to channel that Rabbi Akiva within himself in the city of Rabbi Akiva to rebuild a world that was lost. Obviously, there's no way to actually rebuild it, but in a certain sense, to move history forward and to create an entire. Panovich was the sort of the flagship Haredi yeshiva, and in many ways, he was also attempting to bring those different worlds together. The relationship with Herzfeld, his ability, the Panovich yeshiva, for him it was rebuilding what was lost, and it was. It was that vision that he had, the dreamer who was not sleeping, to rebuild a world that was destroyed. Okay, we'll hold it here. That's the story for this week. Mir Hashem, next week we'll probably do, for our last session, Yerushalayim. What we do in Yerushalayim, I don't know, but probably we'll cover some of the history as well as some of the Torah. Okay, have a great evening, everyone.